Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm going to be talking about the debut album from Comaduster, Hollow Worlds. So here we have another request from a commenter, and a pretty old one at that, a couple of months ago. I remember when I first found this album's Bandcamp page, nothing particularly stood out to me until I started reading the tags. And I saw the tag, Aesthetic Perfection. That really pissed me off at first. Who the heck does this guy think he is, calling his album Aesthetic Perfection? Is that even possible? Or is he trying to piss off the Vaporwave community, or what the heck? Well, I later realized that Aesthetic Perfection is actually the name of a band that Comaduster remixed once. Okay, never mind. But unfortunately, this did lead me to going into this album for the first time kinda ticked off and hoping to prove that it wasn't what it was advertising itself to be. That being said, even when I was in full-on angry critic mode, I couldn't find much to particularly object to here. I mean, aesthetics is certainly not the first thing that comes to mind when I hear this album, but that's just to say it's not exactly ambient. Aside from one track, but I'll get to that. This album immediately struck me as a dubstep album, using similar synth tones and patterns you might hear on a Knife Party release. But it's so much more than that. Nothing follows the usual build-up-drop formula set up by typical EDM. It just goes wherever the heck it wants. It's kind of more like something BT would do, albeit darker and less human-sounding than his usual stuff. And it's even got the attention to detail to back it up. It's almost like dubstep meets, say, Microzik style IDM, with even a little touch of metal and industrial added in. But even that isn't quite an apt description either, because it's not like some kind of super artistic, near unlistenable album that only electronic fanatics like me would enjoy. It's surprisingly accessible and easy to get into. There's plenty of melodies to go around, and even a vocalist on most of the tracks that actually kind of reminds me of, like, Rob Swire, or maybe Trent Reznor, but mostly Rob Swire. In fact, I think this vocalist is actually Comaduster himself, aside from the track Nightsail, which has a vocalist named Cecil Freena, though even that guy sounds kind of like Rob Swire. And I'm sure people have been able to figure out pretty easily that I happen to be a Pendulum fan, so this was all great for me. The best way to describe this album, I think, is shown in the album cover here. It's like a storm of broken metal shards that all seem to have come from the inside of one giant complex machine. It's really spectacular. So, going down track by track, the album starts with Ma, which is probably the least melodic track on here, mostly just creating a sharp and metallic atmosphere. I don't know if it would have been my pick for an opener, but definitely gets your attention. Then we get Winter Eyes, which is mostly a dubstep-ish track, and our introduction to the Rob Swire-ish vocals. It's actually kind of catchy, although for the most part the melody isn't really at the forefront. The Send-Off is next, and that song's pretty similar to Winter Eyes, but it's got a lot of metal influences as well, with quite a few intense metal screams here and there. I'm not really a metalhead myself, big surprise, but it's certainly an interesting track to be sure. Then there's the title track, Hollow Worlds, which is more melodic than any of the previous tracks, featuring this awesome 80s, 90s rock guitar lick. Next is Unfound, which was the one ambient track I mentioned earlier. It's mostly piano-centered, with a little bit of ambient synths and subtle glitchy voices sprinkled here and there. I kinda wish there was more of this kind of stuff in this album, but This one came off to me as one of the best ones just because of how it broke the mold, yet didn't feel out of place either. Next is the dramatic and intense Walls, which I think has a melody similar to an Orbital song, Satan. My favorite part is about 4 minutes in, where most of the chaotic drums just take a little break and leave behind this epic, almost orchestral sounding synth wash. although about 30 seconds later it goes back to the percussive industrial stuff. Chasms is actually much slower and atmospheric. It's kinda spooky and suspenseful sounding, but also still just engaging as the majority of the album. Definitely one of the better ones. Futureproof Design is more Pendulum style drum and bass track, very fast paced, but still carrying over the same suspenseful atmosphere from earlier, maybe even a bit more melodic. There are also some sections that have some of those orchestral synth washes, which is pretty awesome. Then there's Nightsail, which can best be described as like Pendulum Symphony. I mean, there's no live orchestra, but at 11 minutes, it is the most fleshed out track by far, and it just goes in every single direction this album already went in. There are ambient sections, there are dark and percussive IDM industrial sections, there are melodic sections in between that kinda do have some little orchestral bell noises. This is, without question, the standout track on the album. Just seems to combine everything that was awesome about this album into one track. Finally though, the album ends on a relatively peaceful note on Connecting the Seams. This song is kind of like Chasms, but instead of just being kind of spooky and suspenseful, it's kind of sadder and more melancholy. Mostly atmospheric and centered around another 80s guitar lick, but much more subtle than that of the title track. Despite how long it is, it never feels the need to go all out industrial and cut out the melody. Even at its most intense, it's still quite melodic and dramatic. I mean, the industrial breakdowns are cool and all, but this track stands out to me for how it doesn't follow the same lead as most of the other songs. And I think it makes for a very effective ending. Overall, while I don't think this would be like one of the best albums I've ever heard in my life, I can't recommend this enough. My personal music tastes tend towards more ambient and laid-back stuff than what this album has to offer, but even though this isn't the kind of thing I tend to particularly love, it was still a fascinating, engaging, and very fun listen, and there were enough overlaps in my usual taste that I can get motivated to return to this thing over and over again. If you prefer louder varieties of electronic music to the ones I usually do, like dubstep, drum and bass, industrial, what have you, then you'll probably like it even more than I did, and that's really saying something. I mean, I don't really know that much about industrial music outside of like Cabaret Voltaire, but this album might convince me to check out more of the genre. I certainly wasn't about to give this album a 10 or anything, but I think a big part of that is just that I usually prefer quieter stuff, and not because this album didn't impress me. Either way, this is very, very highly recommended. I'm overall feeling an 8.7 out of 10. Favorite tracks: Hollow Worlds, Unfound, Chasms, Futureproof Design, Nightsail, and Connecting the Seams. Least favorite track? Gonna go with The Send-Off. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it. Or if you do, I kinda hope that if you do, it'll just be because you liked the album more than I did. But either way, I'd like to hear your opinion of this album in the comments, or if you have any requests for what I should cover. I'm getting quite a few requests for Zed, so I might cover that next. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.